I know we're one of the last sessions of the day, and we stand between you and cocktails, so we'll try to keep this interesting and on time. I'm pleased to be joined by a really impressive panel. I guess I'm the token male on the panel today, and happy to be so. We're gonna have some incredible insight from these folks who really know the industry well. I'm normally my day job. I'm the managing partner of Sandstone Group, which is a across Canada, a government relations firm based in Ottawa. But I'm here in my capacity as chair of the advisory board of the Canadian Association of Small Modular Reactors. This is a new association that was created just because we thought there needed to be a specific focus on SMRs, small and micro reactors that are a growing field. We just had a conference. Our inaugural conference was in Edmonton, a very successful conference in Edmonton. So I heard a lot about skilling. I heard a lot about when these SMRs are being built, when they're up and running in 2028, 2029, 2030. Where are we going to get the workers? These are great, well-paying, high-skilled jobs, but we need to plan now for a growing and a novel industry. And so I think we're going to have a discussion today about these opportunities. Just quickly on CASMR, we have a focus on, we're built around sort of 5 pillars: Indigenous participation, public education, an initial focus on Western Canada, but we plan to go nationwide, and a focus on regulatory process and building an SMR hub of sort of a go-to place where people can get information about workforces. We're actually planning our own global forum here in Toronto next June. So we'd love to have all and any of you are interested in that. So with that, I'd like to dive into our conversation today. It's on enabling the green talent pipeline. So what I'll do is I'll offer the questions to all our panelists, and do not feel obligated to answer everything. If you agree with everything said, we can move on, but feel free to jump in. So I'd like to focus on the issue of skills itself and ask, what are the most critical skills needed to support the transition to a low carbon economy? And how can academia and industry collaborate more effectively to bridge the current skills gap? Who'd like to start off there? Anyone want to jump in? Okay, go ahead, please.
So I'll start by first talking about Humber, which you may know as Humber College, but is now Humber Polytechnic. And the reason for that transition is the advancement of new programs at Humber. So just for everyone's sake, if you don't know Humber itself, we have 86,000 students, 38,000 are full-time in over 240 programs. And we have 31 degree level programs, more students in degree programs than the entire Ontario college system combined. And we'll have our first graduate degree, applied master's next year in advanced manufacturing. So we're pretty excited about that. But I think for us to talk about skills means we have to come from a place of credibility. And for Humber, we've been investing in our own green transition for some time. We've been a #1 employer, one of the greenest employers in Canada for 8 years in a row. And we're now a gold stars rated institution. In fact, we're the highest in the associate category for all of North America. And today we'll be announcing we will actually hit net zero as the first post-secondary institution in Canada by 2029. So that speaks to our where our credibility comes from, because in my view, every skill has got to become a green skill. There's the direct labor force and the indirect labor force that we need. So it's not just about making sure we have the right builders and creators and technicians that we need for this sector. Every sector that we know, from finance to even culinary, like everything is going to move and transition because we move into a more greener economy. So I think that's the most important thing to start with. And the other piece that comes from that is that Humber, we have what we call Humber Learning Outcomes. And sustainability is a core mindset of that. The super skill for every student is critical thinking. But what this means in each one of these learning outcomes, every single one of our programs have been mapped to ensure that every graduate graduates with this capability, no matter what program they're taking. Sure, we're going to be expanding. We just announced last week more trades programs, 500 additional seats in trades programs. We're going to do even more in that space. And we are quite well endowed in engineering, particularly in the manufacturing technologies. But I think what's important and what's really important for our students is that we have to be credible in this space and we have to view every job as a green job of tomorrow and of today. That's what our students are asking for. That's what employers are asking for. And that's certainly where we are as an institution.
Thank you. Thank you, Anne-Marie. Go ahead, please, Kim.
Oh, thank you for that. That was really very comprehensive. So it's Kim Watson here, and I'm the president of Wipro Canada, but I'm also a senior vice president on Wipro globally. For those of you who don't know who Wipro is, we have about 240,000 employees globally. In Canada, we have 2,000 people that are on our payroll in Canada. So if you think of skills, I'm a recipient of many of the young adults that are starting their careers and making sure that they have the right basis and foundation. To me, to the question about the skills, I think that goes across whether it's powering the green pipeline or pretty well in every facet right now. The judgment and critical thinking skills are the biggest challenge that I'm seeing in our organization. I think that COVID set us back in some time with our graduates that are coming into their first and second jobs, and that ability to take decisions, do the critical thinking as opposed to just following the task are difficult things to learn, and we need to make sure that in academia that we train people about making those critical decisions. From a sustainability perspective, Wipro has been a pioneer on this. So we're a very old company. And when you think of what we do in India, so the majority of our employees are over in India, and sustainability has to be on the agenda every single day. If you've been to India, you'll understand why that is such an important topic. What Wipro has done, and they've done this forever, is that they choose locations. We choose locations in India that typically do not have a community around them. We choose the location and then the community will come, which will give jobs and will establish the community. But from a sustainability, every one of our campuses in India are self-sustainable. And if you come on a tour, and I would love to give anybody a tour in India, if you walk through our buildings, even our air conditioning has been designed to be the most efficient process in all our real estate buildings. We recycle all of our own paper. We recycle all of our own water. It is a self-sustainable city in every single Wipro campus already in India. When I think about, our students that are coming through today and some of the things that they need to think about, the skills are going to be from regulation. Regulation is going to be huge about writing policy. But to your point, it's going to be every single job is going to touch green. So you think about data center. So clearly I've been in technology for a very long time. I started my career in the mid 80s. So I've been in technology a long time. But data centers, they are massive users of energy, massive. And to some of the sustainability efforts and the way that the technology is leapfrogging, we're able to, and I won't say the client's name, but they actually put Wipro in their annual report in that the amount of cars that we took off the road by making their data center more efficient. That doesn't come from the regular technology skills. That comes from, I call it passion with purpose. And I think that's what's going to be our green story going forward. You need to have people that are passionate. Our younger population coming up, they're very passionate about it. And before I came to this, I had a roundtable with some of my team at our offices just up the street. And we went around the room and we were talking about how the younger people today, I'm clearly not in the young group anymore, but the young people, they have a very different perspective and they're very passionate about green. And we need to be able to enable them without forgetting our history, but to bring them along so that they can learn about how they take their passion to make it purposeful. Because at the end of the day, businesses, we have many stakeholders. We've got our stakeholders, but we've got our shareholders. So we need to make sure that when we look at green, that it does have a return on investment and we start moving towards that so people understand the purpose is to do good, but it also has to have a bottom line to their shareholders as well.
Yeah, thanks. Alison Nankivell, CEO of Mars. Mars is the largest urban innovation hub in North America. Just up the street across from the University of Toronto, we work with about 1,200 startups. Mars is a bit of an interesting beast, I like to say, because we have our programming to help startups at all different stages, from early seed to Series A and above. But we also have our real estate business, which is the actual facilities that our startups work in. Those facilities, 1.5 million square feet of space, has 70% of it is used for wet lab use for research. So we have genuine groundbreaking research both on the biotech and on the sustainable economy side going on there. In addition, we have a third pillar of what we do as an internal venture capital fund to help the next generation of seed, pre-seed, Ontario-based technology companies that are coming to market. And just on the issue of sustainability, I'd like to say that Mars has sort of two main pillars. One is healthcare, and one is climate and climate tech. Climate, we probably run the largest climate tech program in Canada. We have over 300 of our startups that are in this space in all areas. It could be energy storage, renewable, new materials, sustainable agriculture, all of these areas. And we draw companies from all over Canada to participate in those programs. One of the things in that I think is really critical to think about is, we work often with the most advanced technology companies. And so you're working with people at the top of the skill set who are coming to you with PhDs, significant academic credentials, or deep research skills. And we are trying to build companies with those people who perhaps have less of the business training. So we've increasingly found this issue is not dissimilar to the issue of green skilling, which is that you have to bring a new set of skills often together and have people from different walks of life come together to really build sustainable companies. And in our case, what we're finding is that's an engagement that we need to do both by working with community colleges and universities across faculties, because increasingly when you're building a company, if it's a clean tech company, you may have, as I said, the scientific knowledge, but not the ability to really build the marketing or build the business plan or the plan about how you build the financial model for this, because you don't have the CFO skill set internally. So I think what we've discovered in this context of discussions is that, who needs to be involved in the whole green supply chain is really critical. And Mars often works as a convener of all of these different parties. We're a neutral group. We bring public sector together with academic, with corporates, with startups, and with funders, because a lot of research is meeting the venture capital groups that are also co-located with us. So I think fostering that discussion is really critical on the whole idea of green skilling, because invariably, we are going to have a supply chain of skill sets that is going to require an integration of parties in a way that perhaps we haven't had before. And I think that's really important. It feels very different than the way academic institutions are set up now. One of the things we have found at Mars that works really well is we have a very strong corporate adoption and technology adoption initiative, including in the green space. And so people like Mitsubishi, who's in the audience here, we're as a close corporate partner of ours, where we're working on things like, what is the journey for a large company in carbon dioxide removal? And what is the role that a startup plays in integrating into that? And what are the different skills as that startup expands and has to start building the physical assets that will help with that carbon dioxide removal need to look like? What are the electricians? Where is the project management skills? And I think pulling together automation, robotics, sustainability, supply chains, these are all things where I think increasingly we have to look at this as a very integrated supply chain of skill sets that we're pulling together in a different way. And I actually think the true innovation that we're going to see in the green skilling space is how people come together in a very novel and different way. And that's certainly something at Mars we're very focused on in our convening function through our conferences, our seminars, and also just putting startups together with both public players as well as private sector on the larger end.
Great. Thank you very much, Susanna.
Wow, a couple of things I really like there. I'm Susanna. I'm the CEO of the Ontario Energy Board, which means that I regulate transmission, distribution, and generation of energy in the largest jurisdiction in North America. It kind of sounded cool when I just said it, but it's not really that cool. Deals with regulators know that we're not that cool. So I'm pleased to be here today. I like really what I've heard, and you know what you just said about this integrated skill set supply chain really resonates with me, because I think soon enough we won't be talking about a low carbon economy. We're just going to be talking about an economy,
Right?
Because that's what it is. It's an economy. It's a new way of doing business. And I recently listened to a podcast, and that podcast was talking about when electricity was first happening, and people started to use electricity. There was this won't stick around. This won't change things at all. And the parallel was now to what we're doing with AI. If you think AI is not going to affect every single thing about what you do, including what you did today, even if you didn't know it, that's the case. So for me, the skills needed to enable the low carbon economy are just the skills you need to enable an economy, period. And I believe strongly that you cannot have a robust and just killer economy if you don't have a strong energy sector. And so I think we've really got to lean into that and think about these are the jobs that are really going to be so critical coming up. So whether you're a construction worker and it's your first job and you're going on mat leave and you're building an SMR, a small modular reactor here in Ontario, or if you're doing some of this innovative work around research, like you're all part of that supply chain. And I really like that language. I'm going to steal it. So thank you for that.
Great. Thank you very much. Let's talk about supply chains then. What can we do to ensure that all elements of the supply chain, from innovation to skilled labor, are integrated effectively to support large-scale decarbonization projects? What are the key barriers and opportunities? Who'd like to take a first crack at that?
I'll go really quick and say sometimes the regulators can be barriers.
Okay, good.
So let's just put that on the table. Now I'll have people answer that question.
Okay. All right, fair enough. Anybody else want to talk about the barriers and opportunities in supply chain?
I think technology adoption is a huge issue in this country, right? It's a huge, we've heard from many people about productivity challenges we have. Mm-hmm. And I think that is on all levels. We have it at the public sector level, where we don't have governments that are necessarily adopting Canadian technology solutions. We have it in the private sector. And I think we cannot have this sort of move to a more seamless supply chain of how we think about moving to a sustainability, but also just digitization writ large, as you know, whether it's AI, whether it's, as you say, the electrification of all of industry. It's going to require people coming together and adopting technology in a way that is very hard to do, because we're still working with archaic systems of how people think about purchasing, regardless of what organization you're in. And I think that's probably one of the biggest barriers, is how do we break that down to enable us to feel comfortable working with new solutions with smaller companies who simply don't look like the typical supplier you would have had before, but are going to be there with instrumental technology that is going to make a difference to your company.
You know, it's interesting about the skills and how things are changing. One of the things that we're seeing is that not all of our new productive workers are going to be part of a large corporation like the one I lead. There's going to be a lot more independent people that are contributing, and that whole policy of making sure you've got privacy and all the other elements and the regulation that goes around it. And I think that you said it very well, this supply chain, it's going to impact everything. And I'm glad you said AI, because you cannot be on any conversation now without saying AI. So we need to do we need to get to a hit level of at least 50 times on this panel. But I think it's the whole supply chain of every single thing that we do, and every single, like you think about your own household, how much things are changing from a green perspective, how the amount of information, depending on your electricity provider, you're getting more and more data. I work with some pretty large utility companies, and one of the things that they're focusing on is data is power. Yeah. So how do they get the data to you as the ultimate consumer so that you can start making decisions rather than one size that fits all? And that's one of the things you're going to see more and more, is even with your own bank. is everything is getting to be more one-on-one because everybody's different. But how do you have the policy and the regulation and the ability to have the skills that can focus on that? So a lot of change, and it's going to come fast and furious in my perspective. And I don't think there's going to be one job that this is not going to impact from a green perspective. And then you put in AI, and then I think at the underlying, back to your point about legacy systems, data is king. We've got so much data, and the technology is moving so quickly about being able to analyze that data. But the challenge is that you have data, I have data, we all have data. But then how do we bring it together to bring our skills so that we can make those leapfrog gains when it comes to green? And I do believe Canada is far behind. If you travel around the world, if you go to Asia, you think about what they're doing in Asia, it very much is much more advanced in a lot of cases. Same thing with Europe. We have a long ways to go. And unfortunately, I think we're overly regulated in some ways that we can't do those experiments to allow us to leverage everything that's going on rest of the world. And I am concerned about the productivity and the leak of skills that are going outside of our country.
For sure.
So what I find really interesting about this conversation is over the last year at Humber, we've been engaged in an exercise to build a new vision. And by looking at that, we've looked really to European countries and what's happening there. And we've decided to really focus on Canada's productivity challenge. That is our sort of real vision to try to figure out ways to get around what's happening where Canada is falling behind. We're number 18 now in OECD countries. In the 90s, we were 88% of the US. Now we've fallen to 71% of the US. We have a problem, and that problem comes from investment in education, technology, and research. And for some reason, Canadians and Canadian institutions, Canadian public, private sector does not invest enough in all three of those. And so we're taking that on. And what does that mean from a skills agenda? It means we're going to break the way in which we do every program at Humber. We're going to do things differently. We're going to meet students where they need to be. We're going to credentialize as they need, seeing that their pathway is going to be different for every student that comes in the door. And most importantly to this, it's around trying to make sure that we focus on employability rather than employment. It's no longer just to equip someone for a job. It's about how are they adaptable in the world ahead. If you think about AI, I have a friend of mine who works in the tech sector that said, it's just like talking about email as the killer app in the 90s, how we're talking about AI today. Yep. This is going to fundamentally revolutionize ourselves, and we really need to be able to equip our students to be adaptable in the future. It's not just about training them to use AI. It's about having them have that mindset of how do they adapt and change with the world ahead. And when we think about AI, and let's link this back to energy with my final comment, is you don't have any of these AIs. We can't have any work on databases without massive investment in power. And if you noticed this morning, Amazon made a significant investment around nuclear energy, and Ontario is a hub and an expertise for that. But we are going to need that power to be able to allow AI and the advancement of machine learning to actually happen. So I think all of this is circular. It's all interconnected. And I think that's certainly what I just picked up even from the three of you just then about how all this intersects together.
Something you said there is really interesting because we talk about meeting students where they are and bringing them in. I'm not worried about students. I'm not worried about new learners. I'm not actually worried about those people that come into your organization, or I sit on the board of governors of Ontario Tech. I'm not worried about those students. I'm worried about the reskilling, and I'm worried about people having glide paths and pathways to what are they going to do next, where they may have been in a certain segment or seen it in a siloed sort of way, and how we're going to need to transition them across. And so that to me is something that's a huge issue that we're going to need to face in terms of the new emerging workers that are going to be in our workplace. So that's sort of on my mind, and this reskilling and the way that some of the trade unions have done a very good job of some of this. We were talking this morning at an event we were at about the number of women that are moving into some of these jobs where they traditionally have not been, but we're going to need everybody everywhere all the time doing those things. And I think that's one of the things that concerns me as as an employer and as a regulator of a sector who is worried that supply chain issues that are related to human capital supply chain issues actually don't let those be the things which hold us back from building the things that we know we need to build in Ontario and that we can build well, right?
Thank you. You all seem to have anticipated my next question because you all mentioned AI. I take it you all see the AI having a huge role in shaping the workforce in the context of the green economy. But what I'd like to ask is, what specific roles or skills should students and workers be focusing on now to remain competitive in the low carbon economy to come? Anyone want to take a crack at that?
Well, from my perspective, clearly I'm in technology. So the skills, again, going back to critical thinking, I think we've gone away from that. I really do think it's more about how it's not. I don't think everybody needs to be an MBA to analyze things to death, but I do think that people need to step back and have an ability to look at the data that's in front of them and turn it into information. I have seen a huge trend change probably in the last 10 years where it's really hard to get my colleagues to come forward with information. It's mostly a lot of data. And I think as the supply chain, and it goes across so many different functions, there is nothing that's not going to cross every function of the group. So being able to collaborate, you're going to have great collaboration skills, which is a challenge coming out of COVID for a lot of our up and coming folks. They haven't had to work in that collaborative environment, going across multiple functions. And pulling it together. So I think that is going to be the biggest change for me. AI, as much as I laugh about it from a Wipro perspective, and I laugh about it because in every panel, everybody's saying AI, it's like going back to email, it's like client server, it's, I've been in technology for 37 plus years. And so there's always this trend. The AI is just basically going to make everything faster to be able to take the data. At the end of the day, it's all about how do we leapfrog get the data, the automation, so that you can take out those lower end skills that you don't need as much because the technology can do it. Now, the hope and the prayer there is that as we upskill and reskill people, they go up the value chain and they get to do a lot more things about connecting the dots. But learning how to do that critical thinking, connecting the dots and that collaboration, those are skills that are a little bit of a lost art in my point of view.
Yeah, but I think a lot of that has to do with how we've set up our academic institutions, right? We've traditionally gone deep and narrow.
Yeah.
And I think we're going back to a holistic way of learning. And I think that's really important. In the old days, people would have done, politics, philosophy, and economics, right? If you were sitting in London in the 19th century. I'm not sure those skills aren't as useful now, especially in an AI, where you need people who can actually write, who can argue, who can build a narrative around something, especially if you're interacting with AI. So I often find in the work that we do, even with startup community, you're taking what are often deep technical founders and you're teaching them to be much more holistic and systematic in how they think. Part of it is critical thinking. Part of it is simply developing the soft skills that are part of building community and building common vision. And I do think that we probably will have to revisit this focus on technical skills and think more about ability to work and thrive in ambiguity and rapid change.
I think too, in that, I'd like to get in on the role of employers and how critical that is, right? Like we have come through eras, we've all worked through eras where economies, employers have had, highs and lows in terms of who they're attracting. And, when I think of the lineup we have for summer student positions at the Ontario Energy Board, it's a huge lineup. But I think we need to do a lot of thinking as employers around what will get these employees to stay. And we've invested time and effort in them. Doesn't matter if you're a construction employer, if you're whatever employer you are, you're investing time in these workers and you want them to stay. There's a reason they add value, right? And so I think that's critically important that we need to actually be working with employers too around what they do and also to enable the flow of things. I often think of the most successful teams I've worked on, the most successful people I've seen in my career. They're actually more like Swiss Army knives than they are having the precision that they need. They come maybe with deep technical expertise, but they know how to do a number of other things. And so advice that I I give my kids now in university and that I give many others, whether they're at new to employment opportunities or further on, is be a Swiss Army knife. Like, be helpful, be practical in so many ways, and do things differently, and don't just be, well, I've got a PhD in this with an MBA in this, and this is what I do for you, and this is what I won't do for you. And I think employers really need to think about some of those things. So I think it's a bit of a two-way street, right? When you think about the value chain.
And for me as president, I mean, the best moments are when you get to see students in action. That's my philosophy in life. And in March, I got invited to this event at our downtown campus here in Toronto, which was students showcasing their work in systems design thinking. And I just walked away from that just thinking, what amazing human beings these individuals are going to be to future employers, because they were taking some of the, what I would say, the most wicked problems in the world. One was looking at garbage in the Philippines and how you transition that into green energy. Another was they were working on some of the most complex societal questions that I know to exist today. And they were using systems design thinking to problem solve so that they could be better citizens in the world to come. But when I came away from that was, that's the type of thinkers that we all want in our businesses and our institutions, are those that can come in and can critically think, can think about a wicked problem within the perspective of it being part of a system. And there was one student, and he won the award at Humber, and then he went off and won the national award against universities, colleges, and polytechs across the country. And he was a refugee from Indonesia. And his system design work was, I was speechless when I left about what these students were doing. And I want to take this moment to talk about what our students are actually learning, which is way beyond a specific skill. These students are in data analytics. They're in programs around policy. They're in programs around supply chain and project management. And that's something that will be on their credential. But I would, as an employer, if I took this, took my hat off as a president, say their systems design thinking is the super skill that will make them successful in the future. And I happened to see one of them, who's now a graduate at the Empire Club earlier today, gainfully working with the Empire Club. And I remembered her project. It was absolutely phenomenal. So AI to me is critical, but we need these types of thinkers that understand the utilization of AI and the real value that we can get out of what AI can provide to improve our health systems, to improve, everything that we do, and to understand it from an ethical perspective as well as to how we can improve society as a result of it.
I just want to add on to that because we do a lot of work for Greater Toronto Airport. So show of hands, how many people have traveled through Pearson? Okay, so pretty well everybody in the room. A few years ago, we wouldn't have even thought about when you deliver technology for something as big as Pearson, you'd be thinking about one size fits all. We have actual designers that actually develop the personas, that how you use the airport, how you access the airport, and we're changing everything about how you move from a technology through that airport. So if you're disabled, you're going to need a different view. So this is green too, because disabled, whether you're a business traveler, you're going to have different needs versus, I get to go on a plane once a year, right? So every persona is very different. How we map that throughout has so many tentacles into technology, into travel, to all the airlines, and then it comes into the green piece of it as well. Like how do you design the airport to be as green? Can you imagine the garbage that airport puts through? And so there's all these things that come together, but these designers, like, we do make a joke about it. They're the ones that you see that have the mohawks and the purple hair, and they're thinking differently than how I would think about things. And going back to those basics about how do you design something, not one size fits all, but how do you design it for the person or the outcome that you're looking for? So that green outcome, are you designing that data center with that in mind, or are you just answering the mail? And I think that's going to be the big change as well with all the skills that are coming up through our schools.
Thank you. Let's talk about partnerships. Can you share any successful examples of partnerships between industry, academia, or startups that have driven innovation and supported climate technology? How can these partnerships be replicated and scaled? For example, how can educational institutions use their convening power to drive innovation in new skills? Want to start that one?
I'll probably start that because
please.
I think one of the advantages of colleges and polytechs is every single one of our programs have program advisory committees, which is made up of employers and business people in those sectors. So there's a continuous, constant dialogue with employers of what these programs need to look like and what skills are needed for industry and for other employment areas that are being sought. But one of the relationships that I am most proud of, I think, is the work we're doing with Siemens, which is deep work around the creation of a sustainable microgrid and renewable technology lab. It's called our Smart Lab. And in that lab, we have students working with Siemens of how to problem solve the use of microgrids to power neighborhoods or to power manufacturing plants. And it's a really interesting question, but when you see Siemens working with our students and our students engaged in that whole exercise, improving the technology for Siemens, but also creating new opportunities for new growth. And if you come to Humber, you'll see this smart microgrid that we have. But if you know about Siemens, and I'm originally from Atlantic Canada, so hurricanes are part of the way of life in Atlantic Canada. And when Hurricane Fiona was coming through, New Brunswick everybody lost power. But there was one neighborhood in Shediac, New Brunswick that did not. And they were being powered by microgrid, Siemens.
Wow.
So getting our students engaged with Siemens, I think, starts to think about not just the possibilities for our communities, but for rural communities and other parts of the world, how you can use different forms of energy to really create a more sustainable world. And our students love it. Siemens loves it. And it's just one example of numerous projects that we have with industry of trying to use the technology they have, having students get their hands and the feel around it, but also problem solve around it with industry to perfect the technology for greater things to come.
Anyone else want to talk about partnerships?
Yeah, I mean, we have one on better buildings. We have at Mars what we call missions for Mars, our missions for Mars, which are all on sustainability. And one that we have now where Mattamy Homes, quite a prominent developer here, is a major funder of, is what we call a challenge. So we're bringing together startups who are working on the decarbonization of the built environment, looking at everything from HVAC systems to building materials to construction techniques. How can we reduce the GHG footprint of the construction sector, which itself has a lot of challenges? It's actually not just an embedded carbon, but in terms of the actual GHG emissions of the whole supply chain around it. And as well as being one of the most challenged areas from a productivity perspective, as we all know, dealing with the housing crisis in many parts of this country. And I think what's really interesting is that ability to bring together, we have academic partners, we have corporate partners, and we have startups, and we are collectively problem solving and looking at those solutions. And the most important thing that I think is critical around this is this chance for first technology adoption that happens when you bring startups together with corporates and you allow them to experiment, to have those kinds of pilots and have it in a safe zone in a way that allows for there be an iteration. We all know most of what has to happen isn't going to be the first time a technology is deployed, it all works perfectly, or what it happens at a pilot scale doesn't necessarily scale up to first commercial use. There is always a sense of learn and give and take in that process. And I think that challenge that we've done, and we've done several of these on the sustainability and climate side, have turned out to be really useful for startups and their ability to really have the relevant solution after several engagements with corporates, but also right away having customers for adoption. And much of that iterates back into the academic realm, where companies who are probably still possibly at that that sort of that company conception level, still working in the academic realm one way or the other, is part of that to learn to bring the next generation of solutions forward. So I think that's been for us a great approach.
Yeah, I love that. You know, one of the things I'd like to flag is we created at the Ontario Energy Board, we created an innovation sandbox, and was the first innovation sandbox inside a regulator in Canada. And a number of people said to me, like, you're a regulator, stay in your lane. Why do you have an innovation sandbox? And my answer to that was, how do we know what we're regulating for in the future? I can regulate the past. I can look through my rearview mirror and see what I just ran over. I can look and see what the traffic's like behind me. How do we know what's happening in front of us? And the creation of this innovation sandbox, which is essentially a safe space for regulated and non-regulated entities to come in. So you might have a Toronto Hydro come in and say, hey, we're thinking about this, this, and this. How would that fly? So they don't have to bring it in through a formal process, through an adjudicated proceeding where the consequences are significant potentially, right? But they could bring things in as ideas, or you can have innovators. And this is what's happening now. We're having innovators come in and say, well, what about in these spheres of activity in energy storage? How would you as a regulator look at this? But we haven't even thought of some of these things that they're bringing to us, which is the brilliant part about the sandbox, because again, it's a safe space. So we can look at things and think, this is the future. How are we going to adapt to this? And then we see innovators coming with regulated entities saying, okay, you gave us this advice with the innovation sandbox. Now we're bringing it forward as a pilot project. Now we're bringing it forward to scale it. Now we're bringing it forward to use it in combination with other things we're doing. And so I think you need to think of different partnerships in different ways to create the environments for things to happen. Because it's easy to say, no, we tried that, or no, we didn't try it. These are the rules that the lines we've got to color within. It's harder. It's much harder to actually think about, okay, what is next and how does that look?
Any other thoughts on partnerships? Okay, let's move on then to government, policymakers, organizations. What immediate steps can organizations, policymakers take to ensure that reskilling and upskilling programs are aligned with the needs of the evolving green economy, especially for workers transitioning from carbon-intensive industries? What role can governments and educational institutions play in facilitating pilot projects to ensure skilled workers are available for jobs of the future when we need them?
I'm thinking that Anne-Marie hosted the Premier of Ontario on a panel this afternoon at the Empire Club. Many of us in the room were there, asking the Premier some tough questions, and I think he gave you some answers to that question.
Yeah, he did. He was talking about the investments that have come in skills, but yet we still have 200,000 jobs that are vacant here in Ontario now. We're going to need 90,000 new employees for the nuclear industry. I think it's going to be a challenging time in our sector. If you've been following the news, financially through the shifts in the student demographics are going to have an impact on our sector. But what I do know about our sector is we're very creative, and we'll constantly try to find our ways around to make sure that we can fulfill the needs of industry. And one of the things, because you were mentioning about reskilling, I mean, one of the things that we're doing at Humber is we're going to automatically accept every credit of a student coming from another Ontario college. Like, I can't believe that doesn't happen. Like, I find that kind of amazing, actually. But what it does is if we've got 31 degree programs, it allows a student to continue to change that pathway and move seamlessly, or go to a postgrad, or take a graduate program as we start to develop that. But the other thing we're going to do is say to a student, if you've been in a program for a year and life happens to you and you've got to step out, then we're going to assess what they have, and we're going to say, with these 2 or 3 micro credentials, you can go to the labor market with this. That's fundamental change in higher education. That's where we're looking to go, is to really lean in to the flexibility that institutions like colleges and polytechs can provide.
So you should give
universities are amazing.
Not
to take away from that.
So they wouldn't get a full degree, but they would get some sort of credential or something? Is that?
They would get a credential to take to the labor market, but then we'd say to them, and this is what you need to come back.
Right.
Because life happens to students, and there's also this need for reskilling continuously. We'll be looking at assessing what they have and say, this is the gap you need to fill. It's not going back from the starting gate. Here's the gap you need to fill, and this will bridge you to the labor market. And then when you're ready and life changes again, you can always come back and we'll start and help you for the next part of your pathway. That to me is fundamental change, but it's what we need to do to equip people whether they're young people coming in and in colleges, the bigger population are mature learners. How do we meet them where they are and help them along that pathway? But thank you for that shout out to the Premier, because the Premier was talking about skills quite a bit today around the link of that to productivity and having the right workforce to be able to empower that. So thank you.
Good. Maybe the other institutions would also accept the credits they get from Humber.
I hope so.
Who else likes to talk about policy? Go ahead.
Yeah, I'll say a few things. I don't know it's as much that we need to lean on government. I think that the private sector needs to come forward with a lot of ideas and experiments about what we're trying to do. And so we do a lot of work with railroads. And when you think about green intensive, every time you have to roll a truck to switch to fix a switch on a railroad that could be in the middle of nowhere, that has huge dollar consequences, and it has huge green consequences. You could be changing out a switch that doesn't need to be changed out, and the technology is all coming to be able to program so that we know where there's an issue. Like even foliage, like for the greenery, how do we keep our power lines protected in Canada? Mm-hmm. So knowing that the technology to be able to tell us you need to go and trim those branches, do the vegetation work now. Like these are all things that technology is helping. Yeah. But at the end of the day, from a green perspective, you think when you're looking at a railroad, being able to, or in a utility, you think of, I don't know whether my Enbridge clients are here, but like if you think of Enbridge, when they have to roll something way out in the middle of nowhere, that has huge implications, not only for the worker safety, but also for all the other aspects. So I think that's really important. And then one of the other things I want to say in a call out, because I know some students reached out to me yesterday on LinkedIn because they saw that I was going to be here today. SAP. So every company pretty well right now are behind schedule rolling out and implementing SAP, S/4HANA. Mm-hmm. Nearly every company, it has to move from ECC, and we do not have enough technology professionals in Canada to even come close to be able to do those implementations. Yep. Project managers that can go across and those collaboration to be able to see what we need to do. We don't have nearly enough project managers. I do think that project management capabilities and skills are going to be one of the hottest skills, and right now it's really hard to find. And I mean, not somebody that can manage, something like taking that water thing over here, but managing the complexity of all these different functions to be able to deliver. So back to that railroad, when we're implementing SAP and rolling that out, as a project manager, you need to be accessing, actually, if you see some of our programs, there's over 200 touch points in the processes that we need to recreate and change. Imagine. And imagine if you don't do it right, because that has this is a panel on the pipeline to green. This is all about SAP moving and the projects that we're doing so that we can get it set up so they can run their business. So we don't need to roll a truck too soon, that we have predictive maintenance so that we know when something's going to break, because it has implications on the worker's safety. All those things come together. In my mind, there is no certain tasks anymore. They go across, and I think you said it very well, the horizontal versus the deep. Yeah. And I really do believe from a training perspective, as we train our young people, and even from a reskill, I think our reskill actually are probably going to be our easiest folks to quickly get them to where we need, because we have such a shortage of workers. So that's what I wanted to add.
I wonder if the analogy of, we're moving to distributed computing, right? We're moving to distributed energy, decentralized. It feels to me that education, which has been a largely centralized activity, sitting in large institutions, that actually has to move to be decentralized. Maybe it's the same as an edge computing, right? On the edge right there at the company, you have an empowerment of how learning happens. And you worry a lot less about the credentials and the official certifications around it, and much more about capabilities that are just needed. And, those capabilities might be delivered by the company, and the capabilities might be delivered by a local institution partnering with that company, or that capability might be working with a nonprofit institution who's somehow involved as well. And I think we have to kind of relax to this idea of distributed capability empowerment, because it is actually the model of what we're doing in so many other parts of our economy. I don't see why we wouldn't be doing it in terms of skills.
Any other thoughts on government policy and advice for our policymakers?
How about just let experiments happen?
Okay, good. That's great.
Get out of the way.
That's good advice. Yeah, but allow for that flexibility. Allow for people to try different things, and not put it all in cookie.
Well, and you know, like, I mean, I think the other part too is that a lot of our capital expenditures are now happening south of the border.
Right.
And that's because the regulations here are too difficult. So if you think of some companies, when they're buying utilities, they're not looking so much at buying the utilities in Canada anymore. They're looking at buying the utilities in the US.
Right.
Why? Because it's a friendlier environment to get things done.
Oh, how about the other thing though? Is let's remember how the provincial trade barriers we have.
Yes.
Yes.
of course.
Skills and
Of course.
certification.
Yeah.
We got to do something about that. It's really frustrating that this is cited again and again, and you get provinces to nod to this, but nothing ever happens. If you want this country to get better, then government needs to be part of enabling, and that means that they have to shift on these things as well.
I heard that problem the first day I got involved in politics. It doesn't seem to improve much, 40 years later. Should I give the regulator a right of reply here?
Good, I'm good, thanks.
Okay, great.
No comment.
We're almost out of time, but I should offer you guys any comments generally on the green talent pipeline, anything that you didn't get to mention because of my questions, any insights you'd like to share on green talent?
I want to add one.
Yeah, please go ahead.
You know, if you haven't had an opportunity to watch TED Talks or some of her, Dr. Frances Fry, she's a Harvard professor. And many years ago, she did this. I see a nodded head. So she believe me, price of admission, go download Dr. Frances Fry, some
Right.
TED Talks. They're phenomenal. But she did this TED Talk some time ago, quite a while, about when the hotels decided that sustainability was going to be a thing. Do you remember that first time? And it was probably, 15 years ago, that you went into the hotel that back then, what, $100 for a hotel room? I think probably if anybody's staying here, it's probably $800 a night, something like that.
Yep.
And so you walk in the room and you see that little sign that says, we're a green hotel, so please don't use your sheets, or if you don't need your sheets changed, don't get the sheets. If you don't use your towels, hang your towels up. So at first, as good Canadians, we look at that thing and we're good rule followers, and we're like, oh, okay, I'm being really good for the environment. But then times have changed. So now we look at it, we go into a hotel room and we're spending $800 and we don't mind hanging up our towel. We've drank the Kool-Aid that, sustainability is a good thing.
Yeah.
But could you give me a free breakfast because you're not paying for the housekeeping? And so my point on this, and it's kind of a funny one, but at the end of the day, this is where it has to be fit for purpose. So sustainability, you can't do sustainability just to have a white paper. Sustainability and about the green pipeline, it has to hit an outcome that makes more sense for everybody in the ecosystem. It can't just be one way. And you think about those hotels today, they've started to change a little bit. I think COVID, they made probably a lot of money because they didn't do any housekeeping. But like you think about how did that really connect to their business outcome? Their client experience probably went way down because they're still charging the same amount but not giving a service. So that connection to the outcome, we need to be clear on that. And I said at the beginning, we have shareholders and stakeholders. We need to make sure that whatever we do also hits those. It just can't be sustainability for sustainability's sake.
Great, good. Well, we're going to wrap up. I would like to thank our panelists today. I leave this discussion optimistic, and I'm optimistic because I know these impressive women are providing the leadership, whether it's academia, business, regulators, industry. You're going to provide your insight and your wisdom in guiding us forward. And so like I said, I leave this discussion very optimistic. It's a lot of change is coming, but we have the right people in place to make those choices. So thank you very much for your time and doing this today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.